Hello everyone. Let's start with liberal theory of state, and this topic belongs to UPSC PSIR. So liberal theory, it arose during the Enlightenment period, 17th and 18th century, and that this period challenged the twin pillars of monarchical absolutism and religious orthodoxy. So the first concept, monarchical absolutism, it means the divine right of king, the ruling authority, the rulers, they have the divine right, they have the absolute right over their subject. And religious orthodoxy means before the period of enlightenment, people believed, people were neck deep in dark things, dark beliefs, superstition, non-rationality, unscientific principle. So enlightenment stood to challenge both things and to dispel the doom, the dark doom that was beset by medieval period. And the one of the political idea of enlightenment, they echoed with the liberal theory. So it emerged as an ideological response to centuries of feudalism, tyranny, and clerical domination. Feudalism is societal, the socio-economic organization of medieval period, and this period is characterized by presence of the absolute ruling authority of monarch and presence of various feudal lords, various vassals, just like big jamindars. So at the time, liberalism as a political ideology, it dispelled, it acted against, and it blocked the various tyrannical idea that run during this time. And with this theory are associated thinkers like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Jean Jacques Rousseau, and that redefined political authority in a way that first they provided an alternative to the divine right of rulers and said that there is a contractual arrangement that is grounded in human reason, dignity, and consent. In other words, these thinkers they challenge the already available political idea. They challenge the political authority, they challenge the monarchical authority, and instead emphasize on human dignity, on individualism, on the presence of rights, on individual rights, and they also emphasize the idea that there is a contractual arrangement between people and the governing authority. And that contractual arrangement, that rule, that political order, it is based on human reason, dignity, and consent. This was a powerful, profound shift from medieval worldview, and during that time, the rulers assumed divine right over their subjects. Divine rights means they consider themselves as God's representatives, and their subjects are mere dependents. On the other hand, liberalism, which was inspired by the Enlightenment idea of scientific revolution and secular humanism, it placed individual at the center of political landscape. And similar ideas were introduced in India during colonial time and during anti-colonial struggle. Here, leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Jawaharlal Nehru, all of them adopted liberal principles to frame demands for self-governance, civil liberty, and constitutionalism. Now, the core assumption of liberal state: first, individual rights are natural and inviolable. Natural means they should be given to them, and they are present in every individual by being born as a human. And inviolable means no authority, not even government, can snatch them. So at the core of liberal theory is a profound belief in inherent dignity, autonomy, and rationality of the individual. And rationality forms the core idea of enlightenment. So liberalism holds that certain rights are pre-political, natural, and inalienable, which means they precede the organization of humans into society. They are there just because a certain individual is born as a human, and they exist independently of the authority of state. And any such authority must be there to protect them. Here, John Locke, via his work True Treatises of Government, he argued that the right to life, liberty, and property, they are natural rights which are fundamental to human existence, and the state must safeguard them. And for Locke, the purpose of government was not to grant these rights because they are already there, they are natural. The purpose of state is to protect them, to ensure their protection. So, according to Locke, government is a trustee of people, which is established by a contractual arrangement, contractual agreement, to create a system that secures these fundamental rights. And this idea formed the philosophical backbone of liberal constitutionalism. Now, the intersection between natural rights and the state. So, the core idea of liberalism is that individuals possess intrinsic rights, natural rights, and these rights are not contingent upon. These rights exist independently of any legal system of government. They are there, inherent to the human nature, and the state it has the responsibility to protect these rights, not the authority to grant or restrict them. Means the state, first, the state does not have any authority to grant these. State does not hold these rights. So if the state is not the originator, state is not reproducing or reproducing them, then state has no right to restrict them. This this emphasization, this philosophy, it was a radical departure from pre-liberal political philosophy, in which rights were seen as privileges they were granted on certain individuals. Where in India, this Lockean legacy is it manifests in Part 3 of Constitution in fundamental rights. Thus, the rights from Article 3 to 32, fundamental rights, they are there because they are fundamental to the development of any individual. And the state, it cannot violate these rights. State cannot snatch these rights. फिर आर्टिकल 21 की लाइन भी देख लेते हैं, the right to life and personal liberty. It says that no person shall be deprived of these rights except according to the procedure established by law. Means there is no other mechanism except by the law. The law, it can, because reasonable restrictions are there, and under contingent situation, emergent situation, the law, it can deprive people of their right. But then it would be based on a procedure and established procedures. And let's have a look at landmark legal cases. First one is Puttaswamy judgment 2017. So this judgment emphasized individuals' autonomy and dignity against state intervention. So in this judgment, the Supreme Court of India declared privacy as a fundamental right under Indian Constitution. And this echoes liberal principles from thinkers like John Stuart Mill, who, by his work on liberty, argued that individuals should be free to do as they choose unless their action harm others. Is harm principle. So both harm principle and the Supreme Court verdict, they supplement each other. And in this verdict, court upheld the individual's right to privacy as an essential to maintain their autonomy and dignity. And that's why this right is considered fundamental right. Now, the dimension of liberalism and individual's autonomy. So, liberal theory, it posits that individual freedom is a fundamental right. And here, again, the John Stuart Mill's concept by his work on liberty. So, he argued that the importance of protecting individual liberty against state intervention and tyranny of majority by the harm principle. And this principle says the individual should be free to act as they choose unless their actions harm others. So this is not difficult to understand what harm principle is. You are free, and it's your decision, it's your life. You can do anything, but your actions should not deprive any other of their freedom, should not inflict any pain upon others. So this idea of Mill, it closely aligned with the fundamental rights of Indian Constitution, particularly the right to freedom of expression and freedom of conscience. And both of these rights, they provide individual autonomy And this individual autonomy, it is defined not just as a freedom from interference, but also capacity to act freely and responsibly. Because when you are given the freedom of expression, uh, you bring out your creative potential. You bring out your best of your potential. And as of freedom of conscience, it provides a psychological or a spiritual support, a spiritual supplementation that can help you bring the best out of you. And if these conditions are not there, then the existence of any individual would be akin to that of an animal, a caged animal, in which you have to follow the certain procedures as dictated by your master. Now, the next concept, the trump card of rights. So, the strength of liberalism, it lies in the priority given to individual right, priority given to individualism over collective interest or majority will. And the same argument has been forwarded by American philosopher Ronald Dworkin, who offered an interpretation of this concept in his book Taking Rights Seriously. So he argued that individual rights are like trumps, a fundamental legal principle that cannot be overridden by ordinary legislative decisions or public majority opinion. So according to him, individual rights serve as moral limits to exercise of governmental power. So this approach provides rights an important safeguard in liberal democracy, which ensure that individuals' dignity and autonomy, they are not subjected to the whims of populism, majority rules, or any such legal principle. फिर इंडिया में भी बात करते हैं तो इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन in order to protect the fundamental rights, it has given the judiciary this review process, the power of judicial review, whereby courts can strike down unconstitutional law, and this provision had been provided under Article 13, which itself is a fundamental right. Now, a comparative example, Roe versus Wade in the USA. So, it is a noteworthy example of Trump principle in which the US Supreme Court, it upheld the right to abortion as a part of individuals' right to privacy. So the court ruled that even if the majority of citizens they opposed abortion, because at the time many Christian religious-minded people they opposed this law, this belief, this demand, because abortion at the time in a hyper-masculine or patriarchal setup, abortion should not be a right in itself. It is not a thing to be talked about. Nobody talks about it, and nobody talked about it then. तो अगर कोई abortion की अधिकार मांग रहा है, demanding that they have the right to bodily autonomy, they have the right to if they want to keep the child or not. So ऐसे में this first it was scandalous, it was sensational, but then court they ruled that yes, because it belonged to couple, because it belonged to women, then it is their private matter, and the government they could not restrict this fundamental right. Similarly, India may be the Supreme Court via this judgment, Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, 2018, it decriminalized same-sex relations, homosexual relationship, by striking down Section 377 of IPC. So इससे पहले the same-sex relationship they were criminalized. It means अगर if two homosexuals they are engaged in same-sex relations, then they can be booked under criminal law. But Supreme Court it decriminalized it because it is individual's personal sphere. So individual's sexual orientation it fall under domain of personal freedom, irrespective of public opinion. With the second principle, limited government and the rule of law. So this principle it was a reaction against centuries of absolutism and unchecked monarchy, where rulers had held absolute power over their subjects. So again, in a reaction to it, liberal idea they sought to restrict governmental power. So according to them, the state must be restrained and should not dominate the private lives of individuals. Instead, it should safeguard these rights. Now, in the words of Montesquieu, Montesquieu's doctrine of separation of power, as outlined in his work, The Spirit of Law 1748, he argued that to prevent the concentration of power and the rise of tyranny, the government should be divided into three branches with sufficient checks and balances. This, these three branches, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The legislature will make laws like the Union Parliament. The executive will implement and enforce these laws, the Council of Ministers, and the whole administrative machinery. And then the judiciary would interpret these laws and resolve dispute. And according to Montesquieu, these branches must function independently with sufficient checks and balances so that no single branch become too powerful. And in Indian case, the separation of power, it already entrenched in the constitution. The Indian judiciary is independent. It has the power of judicial review, and it can invalidate laws that are violative of constitution, where the executive, the prime minister, council of minister, they are accountable to the legislature, and such accountability, it is maintained by the 0 hour, the question hour, the vote of no confidence. Now let's proceed on to A.V. Dicey and the rule of law. So the concept of rule of law, which is another central tenet of liberalism, it was articulated by A.V. Dicey in his work Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution, 1885. So Dicey, by this principle, argued that rule of law, it means no one is above the law, including the government, including the powerful, and everyone is subject to the ordinary law of the land. And this law must be certain so that citizens can know their rights and obligations. And this principle implies that the state's action, the government action, should be regulated by law, and government is not above the law and must be accountable to it. Where in India, the rule of law, it is embedded in the constitution. First, the judiciary's independence, it acts as a safeguard, and it ensures that the state's action, they remain within the framework of the law, the constitution. Where the basic structure and doctrine, it also underscores the importance of constitutional supremacy. The basic structure doctrine says that the basic structure, the basic skeletal of the constitution should not be dismantled, even if the parliament forthrightly has the power to change the constitution, but it cannot just wipe out the whole constitution. It cannot wipe out, it cannot dismantle or demolish the basic structure. Where comes the Madison and the American model of checks and balances. In the American Constitution, the idea of checks and balances was championed by James Madison. So Madison, by his work, the Federalist Papers, stressed that each branch should have sufficient power to counterbalance the others so that any tyranny of single branch can be prevented. For example, in American Constitution, in American legal system, the president can veto legislation passed by Congress. The president is the executive authority, the Congress is the legislative authority. But then Congress can override this veto with a two-third majority. You can see the power of checks and balance between executive and legislature. Then the judiciary can declare law passed by the Congress or the action taken by president as unconstitutional. Now the third branch, it jumps in and it can act as a powerful balance against both legislature and the executive. So this American model emphasized the distribution of power and how to prevent the abuse of government power. फिर इंडिया में बात करते हैं तो the concept of checks and balance is already there, but this checks and balance, it is tilted more towards a socio-democratic altercation, which balances individual liberties with the need for social justice and welfare. Because most of the country, it is already poor and already recuperating from the aftermath of colonial exploitation. So to provide necessary social justice, the directive principles of state policy, They guide the state in ensuring economic and social rights. The DPSC, the part 4, that just comes after part 3 of fundamental right. Here, Herein listed many non-justiciable guidelines for the state, for the government to follow, so that socio-economic justice can be ensured. तो यहाँ पे बहुत सारे गाइडलाइंस दी हुई है कि स्टेट को इस डायरेक्शन में काम करना चाहिए, उस डायरेक्शन में काम करना चाहिए. गांधीयन प्रिंसिपल है, सोशलिस्ट प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, लाइक मिनिमम वेजेस हो गया, प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ एनवायरनमेंट हो गया, एंड अदर सच प्रिंसिपल्स आर देयर. तो ये डीपीएसपी जो है ये भी एक तरह से द सोशियो इकोनॉमिक टिल्ट ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इन टर्म्स ऑफ चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस. फिर बात करते हैं द केशवानंद भारती केस. So in 1973, under this case, it institutionalized the liberal ethos of limited government via basic structure doctrine. So in this judgment, the Supreme Court ruled that Parliament cannot amend the basic structure of the Constitution. And it also held that while Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution. Look, the thing is simple. There are two articles, Article 13 and Article 368. Article 368 says that Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution, whereas Article 13 says Supreme Court can declare any such provision, any such amendment null and void if it is unconstitutional. Now there is a friction between these two. These friction, they started simmering since the promulgation of Constitution, the enactment of Constitution, but कुछ टाइम के लिए things did go smoothly. But after a certain time, especially during the reign of Indira Gandhi, things came to a standoff. क्योंकि Indira Gandhi, via Article 42nd Amendment of 1976, she almost changed the whole constitution. And आप लोग आगे पढ़ेंगे. That's why the 42nd Amendment, it is known as the mini constitution, because she made a far-reaching changes in a lot of provisions, a significant change. इतने सारे changes में it looked like the whole skeleton, the whole constitution was turned upside down. So ऐसे में, when things could not be tolerated anymore, the Supreme Court of India, it came with the basic structure doctrine. And the verdict said that while Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution under Article 368, this power is not absolute, and it cannot be used to violate or dilate the Constitution's basic framework, which means agar Parliament ke paas power hai, and if a certain majority party, some dictatorship comes in, that dictator is going to throw away the Constitution or will dilute the Constitution in a significant manner. So to prevent it, there need to be some safeguard. They need to preserve the basic things. So this basic framework, the basic structure, it also includes respect for individual rights and democratic principles. And this ruling, this verdict also reinforced the idea that Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Even the government and parliament must abide by it. Now, this doctrine, it was a reflection of liberal fear of concentrated power, because any such person, any such majority party, it can majority party or some person with charisma or dictatorial tendency, tyrannical tendency, they may bring in the potential authoritarianism. So some basic things like fundamental rights, basic right, they need to be preserved. So such prevention, it was a nightmare, it was a fear of liberalists, so that such concentrated power can be prevented. Now, in India's constitution, it absorbed liberal principle of limited government, but adapted them to socio-democratic context. Whereas the US system, it focuses on individual liberties, uh, unlike Indian Constitution, who places equal emphasis on justice, welfare, and social equality. ये DPSP वाला आपको अभी बताया ही है. Now, the third principle, consent and the social contracts. So, idea that the legitimacy of a state, the government बन रही है, who provides that legitimacy? Who provides it authority? So, according to this liberalist theory, the legitimacy of the state it is derived from the consent of the government, the people. Who provides the state with the authority? The people. This principle it lies at the heart of liberal political philosophy. And this concept is functional in social contract theories that argue that individuals come together to form a state to protect their natural right. So you can see how state form that individual they come together, they form a social cohesion, and then they form an agreement to form a state so that their natural rights can be protected and a social order can be maintained. Now, the Locke's social contract consent to protect rights. ये वाला पहले ही देख चुके थे. John Locke, his social contract theory in two treatises of government. So, the central argument of John Locke was that individual in the state of nature, they have certain rights that are natural, such as life, liberty, and property. And state has the authority, state has the responsibility to protect these rights. And for Locke, the social contract is a means by which individuals come together to form a state. That's how states are formed. And it doesn't mean surrendering their right, but forming a state, establishing a state who can protect these rights more effectively. And in Locke's view, the state is a voluntary association that are created by individuals, deliberately created by individuals who consent to be governed. And this consent is continuous and conditional. Means if the government fails to protect people's rights or government deliberately violate these rights, then the people they have the right to withdraw their consent and form a new government. So this conception is directly being reflected in the Indian Constitution, which is premised on sovereignty of people. Indian Constitution के preamble में भी लिखा हुआ है that we, the people of India, which symbolizes that the authority of state, the Indian state, it derives from the consent of its citizens. And herein lies the idea of popular sovereignty, means that people are the ultimate source of political authority. And even people are the ultimate source of the constitution. The law of land, it is nothing but the common agreement, the common demand, the common aspiration of people. And law has a source, which is people. So the ultimate, the final authority, the final supremacy, it lies with the people. फिर इसी के against, there is an idea given by Thomas Hobbes, Hobbes and the Leviathan. So Thomas Hobbes presented a different view in his work Leviathan. So he argues that in the state of nature, individuals live in a constant fear and insecurity due to absence of a higher authority, which is which is quite true in international landscape because we do not have any global authority. The international arena, international landscape, it runs on the realist line of self-help. Self-help means there is nobody to rescue you, nobody is going to come to save you. You are on your own. So ऐसे में there is a constant insecurity is there. So here Hobbes does not believe that the social contract merely exists to protect pre-existing rights. Instead, Hobbes suggests that individuals give up a significant portion of their freedom in exchange for security. Because at the end, right will not help you survive, but security will. That's why Thomas Hobbes argued that people should give up some of their freedom so that they can be secure. And for Hobbes, the sovereign, the state, it must have absolute power so that it can maintain and ensure peace. So here, the legitimacy of state, according to Hobbes, it comes from the consent of the government. And here, the governed, the citizens, the people, they are consenting to give up a part of their autonomy for protection and security. So while both of them uh, they walk on different line, but there is a common here. Both of them they talk about the legitimacy that is derived from mutual consent, but the functions that is suggested by both Locke and Hobbes and Locke are different. While Hobbes he had a vision of powerful sovereign to protect the state, Locke's Locke has a vision of more limited government. Now, the manifestation of consent, democratic election, popular participation. In practice, the idea of consent it manifests. Manifest means to appear in real life. It appears in democratic election where citizens express their will through voting. So this is a mechanism of voluntary consent where people they decide who should be there in the government, who should be elected uh, as their representative. Where Indian context में India has a vibrant electoral culture. Elections are conducted regularly at free and fair manner, where citizens are allowed to participate directly in the political process. A universal adult franchise means right to vote भी दिया हुआ है. And here यहाँ पे एक case study है. So the post-emergency election of 1977, it provides a powerful example of the active force of popular consent. So Indira Gandhi ने she imposed emergency in 1975, and this period it curtailed civil liberty in a suspended democratic process. And she was riding on a dictatorship. But when people face the hardships and when many such democratic processes are dismantled, people decisively rejected her in the 1977 election by uh, electing the Janta government in 1970. So this event showcased that in liberal democracy, popular consent is not merely a theoretical idea, but an active force that is capable of challenging entrenched power. Even recent इलेक्शन जो 2024 में हुआ उसमें भी आप देख सकते हैं कि how people they created a balance between two political spectrums, the left and the right one. So the right spectrum was led by NDA government. इसको ऊपर जाने नहीं दिया. It was not allowed to breach that critical dictatorial mark of majority government of 375. And then the left government, it was also woken from slumber and has been provided some leads because of its consistent efforts in last 5 years. तो यहाँ भी आप देख सकते हैं the power, the active power of the consent ऐसे citizens जो हैं by using their popular mandate, they influence the electoral outcomes. And 1977 election symbolized the ultimate power of the electorate to restore electoral norms. And it also reaffirmed that the government ultimately is based on consent. Where Robert Dahl and Poliaki, so by his influential work, Poliaki, Participation and Opposition, Robert Dahl, he expanded upon the idea of democratic legitimacy by focusing on procedural aspects of democracy. So his integration of term polyarchy, which refers to a system of government in which power is distributed among various groups and among political competition. This is the basis of consent that is required for modern democracies. In other words, Robert Dahl, he says in the present time, the democratic legitimacy or the legitimacy of the government in modern democracy, they should be based on polyarchy. multiple centers of power. So those multiple centers of power are not just the three branches, but the power should be distributed between various political groups, various lobby groups, various civil society groups, various students group, various labor unions, and various demands. And all such different pillars, they should decide, they should provide legitimacy to the government. So for Dahl, oligarchy is the ideal form of democracy that ensures popular consent to features such as free and fair elections, civil liberties, and pluralism. ये दोनों तो आप जानते हैं. Pluralism जो अभी आपको बताया वह diverse groups and interests can participate, जहाँ पे हर एक वॉइस को एक जगह मिलती है. Where in Indian context, these elements of oligarchy are reflected in the free and fair election. So civil liberties are protected, elections are held regularly, and the pluralistic nature of Indian society is there, जहाँ पे diverse group from linguistic, regional, ethnic minorities to caste-based groups to economic groups to lobbyist group to civil society, all of them they have access to political participation. Now let's talk about evolution of liberalism from classical to modern. Was classical liberalism that existed between 17th and 19th century. तो शुरू में ही बताया था it emerged during the Enlightenment period, primarily in Europe, to as a reaction against absolute monarchies and feudal system. And thinkers John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Adam Smith they led the intellectual foundation of this form. Now the key features was negative liberty. Negative liberty means state cannot interfere. So this classical liberalism, it believed that true freedom is the absence of interference by state or any external force. And this freedom from coercion, it gives individual free choices to live on their own, to live as per their own life choices, and nothing should be imposed upon them. And here, for thinkers like John Locke, liberty was closely tied to protection of private property. And time and again, I have told you that Locke stood for this idea that individuals have the right to life, liberty, and property, and the state should be there to protect these rights. And the second principle of classical liberalism was minimalistic or night watchman state. So classical liberals envision a minimal state. Minimal state means minimum state, a kind of night watchman state. So here the function of state was to ensure security of citizens by maintaining orders, enforcing contract, and defending the nation from external threat. And the state was not supposed to interfere in personal and economic lives of individuals. And they also emphasize that individuals should have freedom to pursue their own interests and market should operate without state intervention. Free market, laissez-faire market. And Adam Smith, by his work, The Wealth of Nations, argued that the invisible hand of market would ensure economic prosperity and individual well-being via competition and self-interest. Now, the third feature is belief in free market, private property, and individual self-reliance, the core trio. So classical liberals, they were staunch advocate of free market. Free market means the state, the government would not interfere, would not intervene in market in any case. And the classical liberal, they believed that market was the most efficient mechanism for allocating resources. And then the second pillar of this trio was private property, which was nothing but a natural extension of personal liberty. John Locke considered it as a fundamental right. And the final pillar in the trio was belief in individual self-reliance. And this philosophy maintained that individuals, by virtue of their rationality, should be responsible for their own success or failure without state welfare. where the relevance in Western society with less inequality. So, classical liberalism found its greatest relevance in Western society during 17th and 18th century. So, uh, the society, the bourgeois, which means middle class, that began to challenge the aristocratic elites and monarchy. And they wanted the redistribution of wealth and also sought a system where wealth and power they were distributed according to merit rather than privilege. फिर यही आइडिया जो है provided intellectual fire for democratic revolutions such as the American Revolution of 1776 and French Revolution of 1789. फिर बात करते हैं मॉडर्न लिबरलिज्म की. So when the classical liberal system was established in Western society, धीरे धीरे by the 20th century, industrialization, urbanization, globalization, they started revealing their negative consequences, such as economic inequality and social justice. फिर उसके response में modern liberalism emerged, provided a fresh grounds and new ideas. And thinkers such as T.H. Green, L.D. Hobbes, John Rawls, and Amartya Sen, they redefine new ideas, key features. First is shift towards positive liberty. Positive liberty means the individuals are uh, given the freedom to act freely, but then the state they were also given the power, the authority, or a responsibility to intervene, to interfere, so that necessary capacities can be cultivated. In other words, uh, the classical liberal notion believed that freedom means freedom from intervention. So this idea was there. But then the modern liberalism, they believe that the true freedom can only be achieved if individuals have the capabilities and resources necessary to pursue their goal. Like in when society is free, when socio-economic inequalities are less, the wealth is being redistributed and everyone is reaping the fruits of their work. ऐसे में नेगेटिव लिबर्टी या क्लासिकल लिबरल प्रिंसिपल वो अप्लाई होता है बिकॉज इनइक्वालिटी है नहीं, हर एक को अपना जो जितना करेगा उतना मिलेगा. वो प्रिंसिपल उस क्लासिकल टाइम के लिए थी. बट धीरे धीरे जो लेसर फेयर कैपिटलिज्म है उसकी वजह से जो इनकम इनइक्वालिटीज हैं वो बढ़ने लग गई. नाउ द पीपल आर दे आर स्ट्रगलिंग बट देयर नीड्स आर नॉट बीइंग मेट. फिर मटीरियलिज्म है, फिर जो अदर नैरेटिव्स हैं उसकी वजह से भी वी we created a social bubble kind of society. तो ऐसे में the same answer like negative liberty वो apply नहीं हो रहा था if it state with all its resources, if it is not intervening, if it is its resources are not employed in some welfare works, then लोगों को जो necessary life है वो नहीं मिल रही. तो ऐसे में अगर लोगों को freedom दे दी but necessary conditions nahi hai, resources nahi hai, so how are they going to pursue their goals? So this impetus was provided by the modern liberalism, which said that in order to achieve true freedom, certain welfare policies should be integrated. State has to interfere and it should uh, increase the capability and resources of the people so that they can at least have a basic platform to pursue their goals. And T.H. Green argued that negative liberty alone was insufficient because there are people who are impoverished, ill-educated, or marginalized. They will not have any real opportunity to exercise their freedom. So, ऐसे में the freedom है, it would be, a bogus promise. And he believed that state intervention it was necessary to ensure that individuals had access to basic conditions for self-fulfillment. So the first idea, the positive liberty, it is about intervention to provide basic conditions. Then the second feature, state intervention in welfare, education, and health. So here, unlike classical liberals, The modern liberal, they argued that the state must actively intervene in social and economic affairs to promote social justice and equality of opportunity. And modern liberals advocated for welfare program, public education, universal health care, labor rights, etc. And an example is given. The John Rawls, in his theory of justice, introduced the difference principle. The difference principle says the socio-economic inequalities are acceptable only if they benefit the least advantaged. For example, this principle say that जो भी socio-economic inequalities हैं, the gap between the social status of the rich and the poor, the financial bank balance of the rich and poor, this existence is acceptable only if state intervention in any way it not only benefit the rich but also provide certain benefits to the poor. जैसे जो state है, it creates necessary infrastructure like creation of roads for the economically privileged people. तो यहाँ पे वो रोड कंस्ट्रक्शन है that would employ many poor people. फिर उस रोड कंस्ट्रक्शन की वजह से, क्योंकि रोड जो है उसमें बहुत सारे लोग भी ट्रैवल कर सकते हैं, पुअर लोग भी ट्रैवल कर सकते हैं, दे कैन एक्सेस द लोकल मार्केट, वो वहाँ पे अपना जो भी इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी है वो वहाँ पे सेटअप कर सकते हैं। तो यहाँ पे ऐसा कोई भी इंटरवेंशन है, इट शुड नॉट ओनली फॉर द रिच, इट शुड ऑल्सो बेनिफिट द पुअर। तो दूसरा एग्जाम्पल ले लेते हैं, like if the government by its economic policy of taxation, if it is reducing the taxation of the rich, जैसे 30% से 25% कर दिया, now it has reduced taxation by 5%, जो जो अल्ट्रा रिच है उनके टर्म्स में it is you know a huge benefit, a huge increase in their treasury. But अगर उसी के साथ में the same 5%, if it goes in some other welfare projects, like यही जो पैसा है इसमें से बहुत सारा जो है वो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट में यूज हो रहा है, मतलब यही रिच लोग जो है they are diverting this same money for infrastructure project, for welfare of poor people, for school construction, for providing some uh, required assistance in hospitals in such backward areas. तो यहाँ पे ये जो assistance है, it is acceptable. Then comes the T.H. Green's idea of welfare and liberty. So he argued that freedom should not merely mean freedom from restraint, but also freedom to achieve one's potential. And his point was to provide the basic welfare. And his idea shaped much of the social liberal policy in Western democracy, particularly in the post-World War. Then comes John Rawls and his theory of justice. So, by his work, Theory of Justice, he proposed the idea of veil of ignorance to design a just society. So, this veil of ignorance was a thought experiment where individuals were given a task to design a society, to design the principles of a society. Now, उनको ये कहा गया they do not know who they are going to be born as. उनका social, economic, racial status is not known. बस एक blank slate है that in the future you would be born in such a society. तो कैसे, कौन से प्रिंसिपल्स होने चाहिए सोसाइटी के, कौन से सोशल प्रिंसिपल होने चाहिए, कौन से पॉलिटिकल प्रिंसिपल होने चाहिए. But this was a thought experiment. So when individuals were asked to create such a society without knowing their own social, economic, or racial status, without knowing who they are going to be born as, so in that case, Rawls argue that a rational individual would design institutions that ensures certain level of justice that focus on fairness and equality. क्योंकि जब लोगों को पता ही नहीं है कि वो कैसे पैदा होंगे, और तो वो ऐसी सोसाइटी चाहेंगे जिसमें जस्टिस हो. Then the difference principle, वो जो भी आपको बताया, that inequalities are permissible only if they benefit the least advantage. The single idea it involves two things. First, the benefits, they should be given to in a such a way that both rich and the poor, those both privileged and the least advantage, दोनों को फायदा हो. एंड सेकंड, जो बेनिफिट्स हैं वो किसी एक के लिए नहीं हो, और जिसके लिए हो वो उन बेनिफिट को कॉन्सेंट्रेट, उनको कॉर्नर ना करे. Then comes Amartya Sen's capability approach. So he expanded on Rawls' idea and developed the concept of positive liberty with his capability approach, by which he argued, उसके अमर्त्य सेन के concept और T.H. Green के same है, that true freedom just is not just about having formal rights, but also having the real ability, the real capacity to exercise those rights. So, in other words, the state should develop the capability necessary for people to achieve their goals. Capabilities such as education, healthcare, and the freedom to participate in political life. Where India's welfare programs, so many of the modern liberal ideas are reflected in India's welfare policies delineated by DPSP's Part 4 of Constitution. Such policies such as Narega, right to education, the Ayushman Bharat, all of them, they provide individual the condition necessary to live with dignity and autonomy. Now, the criticisms and challenges of liberalism: first, formal equality versus substantive equality. So, while liberalism, it guarantees formal rights, but it often neglects structural disadvantages. That's the core idea of substantive inequality. अगर समझना है तो सिंपल वे में, this one is formal and this one is real. So formal versus real inequality, or formal versus real situation. So legally you have provided people with rights, but the ground reality, it is something different. And in a deeply unequal society like India, unequal both in terms of social and economic landscape, mere legal equality will not empower the historically oppressed. And where this same principle was emphasized by B.R. Ambedkar in Constituent Assembly, who said political democracy must rest on social and economic democracy. Where the second criticism, atomism and the neglect of the community. So here, the liberalism, it assumed that detached or autonomous individuals would look something for their own, or would be happy, would find a place, would live a life of dignity and autonomy. But this assumption, it fails to think about all those cultures where identity is embedded in community, where individual identity is subservient to social circle. तो जैसे इंडिया में है, हमारे पास समाज है, कम्युनिटी है, परिवार है, and even if we are being nuclearized in terms of family, still we have an attached identity. So we cannot ignore this communitarian dimension. And the same thing has been echoed by thinkers like Michel Sandel, Charles Taylor, both of which are proponents of communitarianism. They argue that liberalism undervalues the role of traditions, culture, and collective belonging, a social belonging, where the same thing which has been a thorny issue in India's debate, the Uniform Civil Code. So here the question is, should individual rights override religious practices, or should communities have the right to self-regulate? Uniform Civil Code, it is about regulating the personal affairs, regulating the civil affairs like marriage, divorce, inheritance, property rights. और हम जानते हैं कि इंडिया के समाज में when we are living, that is based on ancient and medieval society of India, तो यहाँ पे बहुत सारे जो ये civil functions हैं, they are regulated by our religion, our caste councils और ये सब, in short, community regulated things. तो ऐसे में अब जो ये जो सिविल प्रैक्टिसेस हैं, हु शुड हैव अथॉरिटी ऑफ दैम? या तो इंडिविजुअल को अथॉरिटी देते हैं कि यू नो your divorce, your marriage, your inheritance, your property rights, all of them they belong to you. Who you adopt, it's your thing. And उसके हिसाब से फिर एक यूनिफॉर्म पूरी इंडिया के लिए पैन इंडिया एक लॉ बन जाए। या फिर जो कम्युनिटीज हैं, जो रिलीजन्स हैं, जो कास्ट काउंसिल्स हैं, उनको फिर फ्रीडम दी जाए कि आप अपने हिसाब से रूल्स बनाइए। दोनों ही इशू जो है ये डिबेट बहुत टाइम से चल रहा है। फिर थर्ड क्रिटिसिज्म इज अबाउट मार्केट फंडामेंटलिज्म एंड इकोनॉमिक inequality. So the neoliberal phase of liberalism post 1980s, which was inspired by Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, it emphasized deregulation and privatization. But this phase also led to widening economic inequality, elite capture of institution, and erosion of social cohesion. So this is again another criticism of neoliberalism or liberal policies, where India may the Oxfam 2023 report, it noted that top 1% own about 40% of India's wealth. Where the latest report, Oxfam 25, by the title Takers Not Makers, it it is a global statistic which says that top 1% hold more wealth than bottom 95%. तो inequalities जो है ये तो बढ़ती ही जा रही है। इससे पहले वाली रिपोर्ट में this figure was around 90%. The top 1% they held more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now अब top 1% के पास 95% से भी ज़्यादा wealth है। So this is height of inequality. Where fourth criticism, liberalism in times of crisis. So liberalism, which is premised on limited government, it struggles during crisis. आज के टाइम में जब the world, the world is not static, it is dynamic, और यहाँ पे बहुत सारी जो चीज़ें हैं they are infesting us and in sequence, like COVID-19 pandemic, फिर वॉर हो रहे हैं, skirmishes हैं। तो ऐसे में लिमिटेड गवर्नमेंट जो है it cannot tackle all those crises. यही सेम चीज जो है COVID-19 pandemic revealed the indispensability of proactive state, which is necessary to manage health, welfare, and logistics. So state should be there to to stand by people during the such testing time. Where countries that emphasize strong liberal tradition but weak in welfare terms, like the US or many Western democracies, they fared worse than nations with robust public system like Germany, New Zealand, or even India. And India, despite challenges, it mobilized state machinery for mass vaccination, food relief, emergency transfer. Finally, the conclusion. So this theory has revolutionized modern politics, and this is the first bedrock that help us come out of slumber of the medieval period. And this has provided us constitutionalism, human rights, and democratic accountability. But it has also limitations in deeply unequal society like India. This principle must evolve. It must integrate concepts of justice, community, and capability. And finally, discarding liberalism is not the way out, because there are certain principles which are very good, which are necessary for us. But to reform the criticism, to resolve the criticism, the way forward, it lies in radicalizing its core promise that all individuals, regardless of identity or background, should live lives that are marked by freedom, dignity, and opportunity. So, in other words, liberalism, it must be reformed, and here the welfare thing should be integrated. Finally, in the words of Rawls, justice is the first virtue of social institution. But then Ambedkar cautions, without social democracy, political democracy is a mere shell. So this is it. अगर कोई ऐसा टॉपिक है that I might have skipped, I did not explain it very well, आप comments drop कर सकते हैं. And then I need you to subscribe to the channel, because the time you are till the time you are engaged in your prelims preparation, I am going to record many of the videos that are in UPSC syllabus. So stay tuned, stay engaged, and support. Thank you.